So today I want to think about the Christian quality of obedience, which is one we don't often think about, but one I think we're all having to think about in the light of what the Prime Minister has asked of us in terms of living in the same place and not going out unless there's a really vital reason for doing so. And I'm going to talk about that using the Rule of St Benedict to help me. The Rule of St Benedict is a monastic rule. It was laid down by St Benedict, sort of 500, 600 AD. And for 400 years, it was one of the most well-read books in Europe, in Western Europe. And it's still a classic today. You can download it in your Kindle for, I don't know, 49p or something, I should think. And if you do, it's one of the most readable of the spiritual classics. And it's laying down how to live as a Christian community, a kind of a monastic community. And one of the qualities it emphasises is obedience. And what's going on when they make such a big deal about that? And I think it's worth investigating in particular because we often won't think that obedience is that hard most of the time. And as an example, I would cite that we on the outside may hear of what happens when there is a profession, when someone goes to become a monk or a nun in a convent or in a monastery. What are they actually committing to? And there are sort of variations on that, but the big three things they will always commit to are poverty, chastity and obedience. And when people on the outside hear what they're committing to that for the rest of their life, but what people will tend to focus on is one of the first two. So we think poverty, that would be very difficult. And we know what we're like. And we live in a capitalist society, which is all completely built around having stuff and buying stuff you like and owning it. And whether that's like your CDs or books or clothes or shoes or wine or whatever it is, the thing that you kind of like having, well, you're not going to have it at all. And we kind of really take a step back because, monks just have nothing. Just the clothes on their back and everything is shared in the community, but essentially they have nothing. And so that is often a big deal from the outside. Then, of course, there's chastity. And again, from the outside, the idea of living your life without ever having a sexual relationship is really hard for us to deal with. Maybe we live in a sexualized society. Maybe it's just kind of natural. That's a kind of a basic human need for most of us. So to think of committing to a life without that is really something we struggle with. So when people talk about poverty, chastity and obedience, and they say, how can you possibly do these things? Often outsiders are thinking of poverty and chastity. But when you actually talk to people who live in monastic communities and you say, what is the thing which is the biggest struggle? In my experience, almost without exception, they say the hardest thing is obedience. Not the other two, obedience. And why is it so hard? Well, it is partly because we live in a very free-thinking society. So we're free to think what we like. And then just to be told what to do really goes against the grain of that. But it is, says St Benedict in the Rule, absolutely integral to how a community can actually function in a good way. So here are a couple of things he says. The first degree of humility is obedience without delay. And then he gives example, such as these, therefore, instantly quitting their own work and giving up their own will with hands disengaged and leaving unfinished what they were doing. And they follow up with the ready step, the work of command with deeds. And later on, and this is when it gets kind of interesting, I think. This obedience, however, will be acceptable to God and agreeable to men then only if what is commanded is done without hesitation, delay, lukewarmness, grumbling or complaint. Because the obedience which is rendered to the superiors is rendered to God. For if a disciple obeyeth with an ill will and murmureth, not only with lips but also in his heart, even though he fulfil the command, yet it will not be acceptable to God, who regardeth the heart of the murmurer. And I think when we're being put into lockdown or finding self-isolation, there is a little bit of wrestling that we have to deal with to accept, is this fair? And I think as a society we have struggled with this, I think, which explains maybe why people have been out and about more than they should have been. But also what is emphasised is we have to overcome that wrestling, that desire to be, that fed upness that we are being called to do something that we don't want to do. Because as long as we're really thinking that we should be allowed outside, we should be allowed to do X, Y, and Z, rather than be cooped up where we are, if that's our focus, then that actually is the route to misery. And I think it's described in the heart, this word murmurers, that people are kind of murmuring. And the wisdom that is distilled with St Benedict here is that that is something we just have to let go of. If we're ever going to find happiness in this situation and fulfillment, we have to accept and obey with a ready heart. And that is something which may be possible and may be significant for all of us going forward.